Thank you, Abraham, Esther, and Jerry, for getting this wonderful message to us in so many different ways. It's great.
We are all in this together.
And broader perspective, right now, Abraham, that's maybe eliciting or facilitating the thought to come, then are we on the leading edge of thought creating forward, or is the future pulling us to it?
Both are happening, and that's an excellent way of describing that, because as the experience happens and you launch your rocket of desire, your desire goes out ahead of you, and then you have to align with that desire in order to move together. If you think in terms of law of attraction, and you think in terms of the thoughts vibrating, and you think in terms of the radio tower, and the radio tower transmitting a signal, and then you think in terms of you adjusting your tuner so that you match the signal, so then you say, well, how do I get into this? In other words, what part is me? I recognize that I'm the tuner, but who is the transmitter? And we say, your launching your desire is actually the transmitter. But you being here in this body was launched from the you that thinks from non-physical. So where do you begin? In other words, so here you are in this leading edge place, and having an experience that gives you a rocket of desire. So where did that rocket of desire start? And you say, well, it started with this argument that I just had with someone. And you say, or did it start with my desire to be in physical when I was in non-physical? And we say, something leads to something, leads to something, leads to something, leads to something, leads to something. In other words, we cannot even begin to find the beginning thoughts. You can never even begin to know where your desire really began. That's why we say to you, it must surely be comforting to you to know that Source has been receiving every bit of input, even the input that you put in before you were physically focused in this body, and is holding all of that knowledge of well-being and is organizing circumstances and events for the accommodation of all things that you want, no matter how specific or general that they may be. And your work is to find alignment with them. So if we were standing in your physical shoes, we would say, I am the tuner that is tuning to the energy of well-being. And then you say, well, where does deliberate creation come into this? In other words, is my role just to pet my cat and sit in the jacuzzi and find thoughts that feel good? And we say, of course that's not your only role. You could not experience only that, because you cannot stop generating thoughts of desire. This universe is established to help you generate thoughts of desire. Let's talk about this. Let's bring this all together, because there are some people in this room who have been following this idea of deliberate creation for a very long time. Let's bring it all together in a very succinct and clear way. So we say, you are the creator of your experience, which means you get what you think about, whether you want it or not. And you have guidance within you that helps you to know whether what you are thinking about is a match to what you want, or whether what you are thinking about is a match to what you don't want. But in either case, as you're offering and practicing the vibration, the probability of it manifesting is greater. But even more important than that, your now moment and the way you feel, which is life itself, is affected by your choice of thoughts. So we said, it's a good idea for you to choose thoughts that feel good. Then we watch our physical friends thinking about generating thoughts. I create my own reality, they say, and I get what I think about whether I want it or not. And then they find themselves in the middle of an unpleasant thought. And then they feel fear, because not only did it feel bad to think the thought, but now they're worried about the future ramifications of having thought the thought. So then they get all worried and they start saying, cancel, cancel. They try to suck the thought back in before the universe gets hold of it. But the universe has already gotten hold of it. But in this time-space reality where there is a buffer of time, there is no real risk, because well-being is the stronger order of the day. So then we say, think of yourselves as step 1 askers, and think of Source as the step 2 answer, but then think of yourself as the step 3 receiver, and put all of your emphasis upon step 3. Then those deliberate creators start feeling like, well, what's all this goal setting about? What's all this business about thinking about what I want and talking about why I want it and projecting the thought of what I want? And we say, step 1 is important to the process, but step 3 is important to the process. And that's when we began calling the science of deliberate creation, the art of allowing, because we want you to understand that you cannot help but generate ideas or rockets of desire, but that your emphasis is best spent on listening and feeling about how you feel in order to guide yourself into the place of allowing what you're asking for. So then, as we watch our physical friends, we notice that a large part of what you are today offering vibrationally has nothing to do with today. People are worried about past relationships. They're still talking about their old employment. They're still talking about their ex-husband, or they're worried about what happened yesterday. And so in their powerful now, which is the junction where who they are meets who they are pinching off their ability to connect with the power and the source and the clarity and the well-being, because they're focused upon something that doesn't have anything to do with their now anyway. So then we began expressing our desire for you to begin practicing thoughts that feel good, so that you begin to generate within yourself an attitude or a vibration that then gives you access more only to those good feeling thoughts. And you see it already. When Jerry first began visiting with us in this format, he said, Abraham, I think there should be islands rather than jails where people who mistreat other people can go. So all the rapers will go to one island and they can do it to each other, and all of the murderers can go to one island and they can do it to each other. So it would really be justice. And we said those islands already exist. Now those who heard us say that were upset. How can the one who gets murdered end up on the same island with the murderer? In other words, aren't there victims and perpetrators of crime? And we say it is vibrational alignment. In other words, only one who fears and has given it enough attention that it has become a dominant part of their vibration could ever rendezvous with someone who was in the mode of doing that. In other words, these vibrational islands always exist. So then we began to want you to understand that there is not a source of bad stuff and a source of good stuff. Because physical beings tend to think that. They tend to say, well, here, this one is living well and this one is not living well, and the one who is not living well certainly would not do it to themselves. No one would create things that they do not want. That surely cannot be right. There must be some assertion of bad stuff. And we say, and yet when you walk into a room, you never look for the dark switch. You never say, I will flip a switch to flood the inky darkness in to cover up the light. You accept that there is a resistance to the light, but there is not a source of darkness. And we say in exactly the same way, there is not a source of evil, there is not a source of sickness, there is not a source of lack. There is a vibrational proclivity that pinches off the well-being that would be there if you weren't doing that thing you're doing that is not letting it in. What thing that I'm doing? Well, it's a lot of different things, but it always feels bad. That thing you do that doesn't allow the well-being to flow always is accompanied by fear or anger or frustration or some negative emotion, because that's your indicator of your alignment of energy. So now we come round again, and we're wanting you to begin to feel how you feel, and we're wanting you to feel for a thought that feels better. Focus on something, anything. Feel for a thought that feels better. That's what the path of most allowance is, you see. So then deliberate creators say, but how can that be creating? Shouldn't I be doing something more important than just feeling for the thought that feels better? And we say, but you have to understand, you've been thinking the thoughts, you've been mining the stuff, you've been launching the rockets. All that is knows who you are and what you want. Your future is laid out before you in such precision and such perfection, with so many roads and avenues leading to the fulfillment of the glorious life that you want to live. Just find a reason right now to feel good, right now to feel good, right now to feel good, right now to feel good. And friends, it is surprising, even funny sometimes. They will say, well, what's in it for me to feel good? What will that get me? If I work hard and I feel good, then will I get the results I really want? And we say, oh, will you ever? But how did you lose track of the importance of feeling good? Feeling good, feeling life, feeling God, being present. There is nothing more delicious than to be physically focused and have the source that is you pouring through you in this moment. And so we would like all of you to just relax and lighten up and be easier on yourself and stop trying to organize thoughts and decide which are good thoughts and which are bad thoughts and which are good. That's like the firemen come to your house when your house is on fire and knock out your windows and spray water in the house, and you say, oh, this was a very good thing. But if the firemen come on a day there is no fire and knock out your windows and spray water in your house, it's not such a good thing, even though it was the same thing. And you say, well, there are different circumstances, and we say there always are. And each of you must, in the moment, find your path of least resistance. In other words, nothing matters than how you feel, because nothing matters more than your connection with who you are, because if you're not connected to who you are, you're not living your life. There is no use in being physically focused and pinching off who you are. That's why negative emotion always feels like emptiness. Doesn't fear feel empty? Doesn't anger feel empty? Doesn't love feel full? Doesn't joy feel full? Doesn't appreciation feel full? You can just feel yourself filling with who you are, you see. So don't worry too much about trying to figure out the source of thoughts or even the appropriateness of thoughts. Just feel your way as best you can into better and better feeling moments in time. How do I feel now? How do I feel now? How do I feel now? Esther has devised for herself and for others a segment file in her computer where she indicates what she plans to do in the next segment. And as we offer the idea of segment intending, it is our desire that what you say is, this is my plan for now, and this is the value that I expect to give to it and receive from it. In other words, I'm doing this because I'm building this enclosure for my bonsai plants because this is the value that I believe that I will experience from it. And I'm going to spend approximately this much time, and during that time, it is my desire to feel fulfilled and to feel invigorated and to feel clear-minded and to feel flexible and to feel agile mentally and to feel productive and to feel satisfied. In other words, I want this segment of my life, which is all of my life. My whole life I'm living in this segment. In other words, you can't live it later, you're living it now. And you can't live what you lived before now. In other words, you're living your life now. How are you doing now in this convergence of energies? How am I utilizing this moment in time? Am I expanding? Am I loving? Am I living? How much of me is here? Because the most unimpressive of actions can be as fulfilling as the most impressive, because Source does not feel better in one endeavor than another. Source, when it is allowed, always feels delicious, you see. It's not what you're doing, it's how you are allowing the energy to flow through while you are doing that makes the difference in life, you see. That's why there are joyful gardeners, and there are joyful surgeons, and there are joyful postal workers. Yesterday, Jerry and Esther were walking through the grounds at the Abraham-Hicks Publications Center, and the FedEx delivery girl had stopped to pick up a package at the office, and Jerry and Esther were far away. She did not see them. And as she drove her truck to turn around, she yelled in the most joyful cry at the top of her lungs, "Yabba dabba doo!" And Jerry and Esther said, "Right back at you." In other words, it was an expression of exuberance. Now, what it meant and why she did it, only she knows. But she was shouting her joy to the universe. And we would find ways of doing that segment after segment after segment after segment after segment. And what is the ulterior motive? So that all of your dreams can come true? Sure. What is the ulterior motive? So that things you've been asking for can come to you with less resistance? Sure. What is the motive? So that things that have been on hold can begin to manifest? Of course. But the real ulterior motive is, life is right now and it ought to feel good.
And it does.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you so
Yes,
much for
indeed.
the love and the joy and the power of your message.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you.
Right back at you. Now what? Right here.